In my NIV, it's subtitled Living Sacrifices. Therefore, and this is, by the way, what the young man was talking about in the video. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, and offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. And then let's jump over Romans 8:5-6 for the capper here. Those who live according to the sinful nature have their minds set on what that nature desires. Who live in accordance with the Spirit have their minds set on what the Spirit desires. The mind of sinful man is death, but the mind controlled by the Spirit is life and peace. We're going to focus on those two a lot later, but at least you can hear that. The cap, but the mind that's focused on the Spirit is of peace. So we started out talking about what does it mean to create, what's the meaning of the word creation, and then we talked a little bit more about what are you creating, what have you created, both positive and negative. And let me then ask you this question that hopefully you've had a chance to think about and complete and looking for your answers. So how do you feel about your creations?
All right. So, my other responses last time were recipes and sometimes like stuff through work, like through rating worksheets, right? So mine was when the recipe is followed and everyone likes the result, I feel good about it, which is great, right? Or when the code I've written works correctly and gives me the right result, that's really good too. Because it may work, but it may not give what I'm looking for, right? Yep. But when the food didn't turn out well, or my code doesn't work as expected, I do get frustrated and sometimes embarrassed. So that was my thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I like that last part, especially, Sarah. Sometimes I get embarrassed when the stuff I think I'm creating either doesn't come out the way I think it is or think it should, or other people don't appreciate it the way I think they should.
I can think back to, I'll tell you one thing, I can think back to first time I made something and Steve was very gracious and we tried to eat it, but we're both like, yeah, that's not going to work. But I was very embarrassed because as a wife, I should be able to cook, right? So that was very embarrassing. I know it was very embarrassing to me that I could not cook a decent meal for my husband. I've gotten better. Pizza. At least I think I've gotten better.
It would be difficult not to.
It was that bad.
My goodness.
It was bad.
Steve, I didn't expect you to go there.
The thing is, we can remember this from 1994. That's how bad it was. We did go so I don't know what we did afterwards, but I was
Pizza Hut for.
I don't even know what we did. Yeah.
Been there, done that.
What else you got?
One of the other things that came to my mind, but it's along the same line, was sometimes I create a mess,
Oh yeah.
And so, yeah, there's an embarrassment involved there. You mentioned the cooking, and you can follow the recipe, but what if your sugar is mismarked as salt, or vice versa?
Been there, done that too.
So, I mean, you're doing what you think is the correct thing, but one of the ingredients is mismarked. Or paprika is, you don't read it completely and say pepper or peppers, whichever. So sometimes the creation can be a mess. As a matter of fact, I probably should say this, but no, you know what? I'm not going to say it. But yeah, there's an embarrassment. How do I feel about it? Yeah, there's a perhaps pride of authorship when you do the code and the code works right. I'm with you. Or you do the code works correctly, but the data's wrong,
Mhm.
and that's not been cleaned. I'm speaking technically here.
No, or you don't understand the structure of your data. Sometimes that will get you in trouble too.
Oh my.
Sorry,
Mhm.
technically.
I get that, sure. You know, you're bringing in, one of the, long story. When you're dependent upon people who enter things correctly, and they don't. Or they try to put characters in numeric fields, and it's like, didn't work. Anyway, so there it's an embarrassment. There's a feel bad. Speaking of recipes, I recall a time, and I'm gonna get myself in trouble here again. With my first marriage, my wife then made a meatloaf.
That's what I did.
But it was, unfortunately, she had made it in such a way that it was terribly greasy. And when she went to go and try to resolve that issue, she went to try to pour the grease off of the meatloaf into the trash can. And it all slid off, which is probably, so anyway, but sometimes you make a mess and you find out that, you know, you sometimes can't clean it up the way you would like to. So there's sometimes a stuckness to that.
Sometimes there's regret.
Mhm.
I'm thinking back when we were talking about what we created, and I said that things have been kind of rough, and the atmosphere that I had created in my home was palatable. And I had strong regrets because it didn't just affect me, it has that trickle down effect to everyone in the home. So sometimes there can be regrets for what you create, whether it's a physical thing or an emotional state or what. So, regrets, conviction about that. So that's kind of what I come up with.
Turn it toward.
Hi, Ellen.
There. Hey, so yeah, when I was thinking this question, and Sarah, I've certainly been there in terms of, when you initially like learning to cook or whatever. But I think when I see it in terms of cooking or creating art or crafts or whatever, that now that there's a comfort level with what that you understand the basics of how recipes work, how foods go together, that now it's an experimentation. So, it's you feel that I can create something without a recipe. I can create something without following it. And it's a learning opportunity. So, it may not come out the way you want, or it may be like, wow, this is amazing. Can I replicate it? An opportunity, because Preston and I made our, we actually made our own food for our wedding just to save money in advance, and we laugh to this day that we made this most amazing Caesar salad dressing because we just flung it, and it came out amazing. Didn't write down the recipe to replicate it, but I think the point is that sometimes you can, when you have that comfort feel and comfort in that it may not all be success, that you can, boldly try something, and it might be a success, it might be a failure, but that's okay. It's a learning opportunity.
So there the regret is, oh, I didn't write the recipe down.
Yeah. I mean, and you're right, Ellen, because, once you do figure out kind of how things go, you can kind of, I don't need to measure that spice anymore. I kind of know about what to put in there, right? So, yeah, so you can get confidence from your failures, which is a good thing as long as you don't look at it as just a failure, right? But you look at it as an OFI. That's what we call them. We call them OFIs, opportunities for improvement.
There's a commercial on TV. Who it is, but I think he's supposedly Thomas Edison. They say he failed so many times trying to create the light bulb. And he said, what I found was 100 ways not to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was Edison. That's a commercial. Yeah.
Actually, it was the 101st word that actually worked.
Yeah.
That's
Funny. I remember as a little girl, again, Sherry, you appreciate this, always like creating things. And, I love about the fact that you could take like crayon shavings and put them between wax paper, right? And create some really cool art. Well, I didn't know that, it only works with wax paper. And I actually did it with saran wrap and totally ruined my mother's iron. So that is a creation that I will never forget experience because I totally screwed up and it was not a good thing.
Thank you. I appreciate the exchanges that we're having because there are elements in here that we can harken back to when I start bringing the hammer in to say, this is what the answer is. And you said this before I even told you that that was the answer. Let me give you some thoughts and then let me put some labels on some of the things that you've captured in this brief exchange about creating stuff. The question says, how do you feel about your creations, right? I feel better about some than others.
Mhm.
I like this one because this is where Ellen and Sarah just covered. I feel like I'm getting smarter about what I create, right? That's the opportunities for improvement. I feel like I'm getting smarter about what I create. And now Gene kind of went here because he wasn't really talking about him. He was talking about kind of other stuff. I feel like others sabotage what I create.
Oh.
I'm not very creative. I'm not motivated to create. I haven't created very much. I'd rather not create. Those are all spectrum concepts about the thought of individual creation, creating something. It can go from, I'm always doing it and I take my shots, I'm always doing it, and sometimes I'm getting smarter to, nope, I'm not going to do that. But in order sometimes to respond the way that Sherry did, or even Ellen did, in recognizing that's an oopsie, you've got to have a sense of a couple of things that sometimes we don't do very well. And one is a word you hear all the time in churches, but I'm going to throw it back out because you're familiar with the word. And then the second may sound like a little bit of psychobabble, but it makes sense as well. The first thing you need to have is a sense of humility. Because when you're in untrodden ground, when you're dealing with a thing that you really don't have an expertise about, you've got to be able to deal with what should have been, what you should have done, what you could have done. But sometimes we're so fixated on the creation and we're so comfortable, and you'll see the next question, we're so comfortable kind of what we've created, and this is the psychobabble term, we lack, and this is sometimes what Christians need to get in the right way. We lack self-awareness. Everybody following me, or do we need to delve into that a little bit more?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
This is how do we feel about our creations? You're saying that sometimes we lack self-awareness in our creation?
That's right.
Okay.
Here's how that is. Let me give you a little bit of an idea. I'm going to give you kind of it'll be a little bit odd, but I want you to see the exaggeration. And this is not directed at anybody in particular, but this is kind of an experience that Ellen and I had, and we tried to run away from this. So please recognize that it's not at anybody. Thank you, Diane. We used to worship with a group of people, and the badge of honor used to be homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
And so the parents who homeschooled would regularly get together and compare and contrast homeschooling. And one of the things often that used to happen is we used to hear reports that somebody's fifth grader was doing college level work regularly. And so sometimes in that situation, because people are about this creation and they're about, in some ways, I don't want to use the really big, huge word, so let me dumb it down a little bit. And they want to prop themselves up because of what it is that they're doing. They inflate the results as opposed to going, I am completely and totally out of my element. I should not be doing this. And I shouldn't be necessarily looking at what I think are results that may be inflated and pat myself on the back. And maybe I need to consult someone who knows better and differently about this thing, as opposed to blindly thinking, I'm great at this. Does that make sense? Even though I'm using an exaggerated element? Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes we do that. Is we play basketball with our friends down at the playground all the time, and we begin to think that we're the next Michael Jordan. And then we start playing with other people, and we realize how bad we are. But the problem is not me. The problem is the refs. The problem is I'm not playing on the playground I usually like. The problem is I'm not playing with the ball I usually play with. The rim is too hot. It's too hot. So there's not a self-awareness, because when I create and it's terrible, I blame it on everything else. I don't have the humility to take into consideration, maybe I'm just awful at this. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts about that as I throw that out on the table?
You brought something to mind that, again, is a commercial. Guy named Charles Barkley is chosen to be a part of the team on the basketball court. That's a playground basketball court. And everybody else is under 5 feet tall and much younger. And he's, yeah, I got it. Well, you know what? Sometimes it just is a matter of, like you said, self-awareness. You got to realize what your environment is and where you fit into that. Barkley, I mean, he can dunk it practically without even flat-footed, compared to what these other kids can do. I think you're right. I think we sometimes will get excited about being able to, the old saying is, in the land of the blind, one eye is king. This is true. But if you go to somebody, if you got 2 eyes, one eye has difficulty because there's a depth perception issue. There's a reason that God gave us 2 eyes. So the point that I'm taking from your comment is, sometimes we need to understand that sometimes we just aren't what we think we are. We're not all that in a bag of chips.
That's correct. That's where the self-awareness and the humility has to come into play. And a personal example of that is when Ellen and I moved from Connecticut to Virginia. And I started to work with agencies of a similar nature down here that were like those in New England with whom I've worked previously. And I would get admonished by my CEO and my directors here, where they would say, "You're speaking too quickly. You're assuming that folks have a certain understanding of the field here. We don't. And you presenting in the way that you're presenting right now is not going to be impactful because we're not quite yet where it is that you think we should be." Now, I can tell you that can be a very insulting, by the way, that's part of my creation. That can be a very insulting interaction where I walk away from that very angry. Very angry. Or walk away feeling defeated because that which I've created, which I think is so good, has now had holes shot in it. Or if I have a sense of self-awareness and humility and opportunities for improvement, I can walk away believing that exchange was about constructive feedback. and that I can use that to read the room and read myself and make adjustments that look to better have success at the outcome. But if I continue in the way that I was warned not to, I'm going to become more frustrated. I'm going to become more overwhelmed. I'm eventually going to want to leave that company, even if I'm getting a paycheck, because I'm not going to feel appreciated. Or I'm going to keep doing what I do every day just because I get a paycheck, and there's no zeal and there's no love for it because I don't feel like I contribute anything that's really of meaning. So in the creation business, for us personally, we need to have a sense of humility, first and foremost. We need to have a sense of self-awareness so that the opportunities that when we create, we recognize that perhaps if we do this with humility and self-awareness, we can get smarter as we go, as opposed to feeling defeated, as opposed to stopping to create, as opposed to saying it's not my job to create, as opposed to thinking that other people sabotage me when I create. By the way, that's what I could have taken from that interaction. Bringing cutting edge information and philosophy to this group, they're cutting me at my knees. Who do they think they are?
We had a fellow when I was in New York. His name was Ronnie. And Ronnie, for a New Yorker, spoke very, very quickly. And his comment was very, very fast. Talk fast, you listen to slow. That could be an approach as well, putting it on somebody else who's from a different culture and they're not able to hear it, kind of thing. I get what you're saying too. Thank you.
Following up that question about how do you feel about your creations, and this is where I want to end today. So when you create something unhealthy, unproductive, or simply bad, when you create something unhealthy, unproductive, or simply bad, how do you respond? Ready, Sarah?
I'm looking at my husband because he knows how I respond. I do get very frustrated. It's okay, honey. I can admit that. I do get very frustrated, and I will call myself names sometimes.
Okay.
Do that on the golf course.
Because I'm not alone. I'm not alone. Because especially if you feel like you've tried your best and then it sucks. Yeah. So yeah. But it's frustrated, tend to, I don't know, sometimes you can then give up and don't want to do it again. Right? Sometimes you can just say, well, clearly, honey, I cannot cook. So we are going to be eating out every night of our married life. Or you're cooking, one or the other. So,
Food out of a box.
but I mean, sometimes with coding, now coding is a little more challenging because, like Jen and I have said, if the data's bad, you can have all the right code in the world, right? Data's bad doesn't really help you. But I think frustration is probably the most that I can probably feel about that, unless my husband has something else he wants to add.
You know what? I think we're just going to go with your word, frustration.
It's a safe place, honey.
Yes.
So
Stays that way.
It's the drive home he's worried about.
It comes down to, when it comes to talk about codes, most of what you have to do is code for the errors. Most of what you're coding for is what's come in off of what I've been experiencing. But yeah, there's a frustration. There's a self-defeatedness. I mean, sometimes you call yourself names, or there is perhaps sometimes there's a sense of redirect. Why did they do that?
This is your mess.
I understand, but it's easy to blame the data entry or something like that when it comes to, or why did they say that? It is us.
Blame your mother for not teaching you how to cook well.
I think one of the hardest parts that we're
Compiling the wrong source code.
yeah, if we, rather than being frustrated, quitting, the hardest part is owning it. I screwed up. I gotta fix it. It's probably the hardest part, owning it.
No, let's just beat the drum and keep on going
Okay.
and not admit it.
I mean, that's
It's not my fault,
right?
it's not my fault.
Not my fault, right?
You mourn it because realize you messed up. And now you got to face it, confess it, apologize for it. So yeah, or your meatloaf was bad because your ground beef was bad.
Oh, man. So that there's again a bad source. I never thought about that. So I like what you said, born it or own it. Okay.
So hopefully through a lot of these questions about us personally, can hear in the background, or I would encourage you to keep in the background, humility, self-awareness, opportunities for improvement. Sorry about that in the background. This is what happens in the virtual work environment these days. Kids and dogs and other stuff that were never in the office. But
Yes.
humility,
Or cats.
opportunities for improvement. So let me give you some thoughts about that.
Cats.
How do you respond? I'm fine with it. It's mine and I own it. I hate being in the middle of messiness. I'm overwhelmed because I can't get out of my own way. I seek assistance to fix the situation. I like this next one a lot. It's none of yours or anyone else's business how I respond. I don't know what to do except to keep doing what I usually do. What are your thoughts about this?
I was always thinking about adding to your list above. Helps to have humility, self-awareness, opportunities for improvement, self-control.
Well, okay.
To throw our feelings in, right?
Yep.
We jump off our feelings, and that's when we really get in trouble. Instead of stopping and taking the feelings out and say, how would God see this conversation, this moment? Well, I'm still learning.
You know, Diane, as much as I am okay getting in trouble, I probably didn't consider that one to throw out, because that one almost gets me even more in trouble by saying believers should have self-control. In fact, I almost think it's a gift of the Spirit, I think, but maybe a fruit of the Spirit, but I could be wrong there. But that self-control is very important, because you just said something that I'm glad I didn't say, but you said it, so I hope we remember this when we get here. Self-control is doing this thing that Diane said, is recognizing that the heart is decidedly wicked. Who can know it? So when you watch TV shows, when you watch movies, and you hear, this is surprisingly something that comes from parents all the time, but parents, even the people that are professed believers, watch this. Here's the recommendation. Follow your heart. Now, I just told you the scriptures say the heart is decidedly wicked. Who can know it? And these people who are professed believers say, follow your heart. This is why this is stepping in it a little bit, because basically what Diane just said, that thankfully I didn't have to say, is your emotions and how you feel about stuff may not be of import. Your feelings and how you think about stuff in something. Now, thinking not so much, but feel about it may be of no import. If you have a sense of self-awareness and opportunity for improvement as well as humility, if the thing stinks, then don't feel a way, euphemism, don't feel any way about it. Recognize it for what it is and then say, Lord, give me a heart like thine. Give me an awareness and discernment like yours so that I can see this for what it is and not feel anything about it in order to have it repaired, moved, made better, or eliminated. Part of the reason that we don't do that is because one of the early answers is, I like my mess, own it, and it's my stuff, and it's none of, oh, it's a variety of these, and it's none of your business what kind of messiness I'm in.
Okay, that's a different kind of ownership and humility than what I was talking about. I was referring to owning it and saying, yeah, I messed up, rather than saying, none of your business. I'm saying, I did it, I need to fix it, I will fix it.
Well, that's neat, but that's related. This is different perspectives that people have when what they create winds up being messy. So sometimes we own it and say, let me fix it. But sometimes the answer is also, stay out of my business. It's none of your business.
I think the way of the world now is kind of that second way. It's none of your business.
Mhm.
Yes,
Anybody else?
our churches are full of that sentiment. And you guys hear this in TV shows all the time. But you hear it in, that's your truth.
Yeah.
Right? That's how we hear it these days. And that means my truth is my truth, your truth is your truth. Don't mess in my truth because this is my truth and it works for me. So you don't have permission to step over the line, and there's a self-awareness, but there's no humility. And there's no self-control with it's my truth and your truth. Because that's about how I feel. Ellen and I were watching a show the other day where there was a couple who was interracial getting together, and they were talking about kind of their backgrounds, and the language that they had to use to be respectful because of the culture we're in was they were speaking kind of through a pith where they couldn't see each other, and so then they began to ask kind of questions about their background, and the young lady said, "Well, what are you like?" And he said something I thought I would never hear it say, but I identify as African American. And Ellen and I both grabbed our heads and just started shaking it, going, "What do you identify as African American? You is African American, or you the black guy." And that's the culture we live in today, where my truth is my truth. If he identified as a 4-year-old Chinese girl, well, doggone it, that's his truth. And see, that doesn't have self-control because it's about how I feel, and it doesn't have a sense of humility attached to it, where somebody can say, it's just stupid. So your thoughts there?
We have a couple of places where we, in our family, we would say Smith quote here. And I won't give you that, but that's a Smith quote that Jim Smith would use quite regularly. Or we'll say Terminator quote here. I'll be back. Here's one I think where we might want to say Ben Shapiro quote here. Facts don't care about your feelings. And that's kind of real to my way of thinking. If it's a fact, then feeling really doesn't play into it.
Yeah, but that's for us.
Yeah, that may be true for you, Gene. True for me.
There won't be any self-control coming back at you when you say that.
Hey, that's the answer you give when you say that.
It's kind of like what this guy said at the dojo one time. We were talking about the whole, identify as a different gender or something like that. And his response was, and I apologize to this appearances, anybody, but he says, if I get an apple, sometimes it's still got a stem on it, sometimes it don't. Facts are facts.
So let's make sure we define that well as we close out. Now remember, facts doesn't mean truth. If you look up in the dictionary, truth will usually be secondary or tertiary under the definition. Fact is simply information, right? But we've kind of colloquiated that either it's truth or it's fact. Sorry, it's fact or it's false. So fact is just a piece of information, especially for those of you who are math files, right? Information is just a fact. So the difference, though, with truth and information, right? And here's why I'm telling you this, is if Brother Gene, you believe what it is that you're saying, please remember, this is going to come back to visit us as we go through this study, which is, if we're supposed to apply the cold, hard truth of what is truth versus what's fact, what is truth, then we need to divorce ourselves from the emotion and have a sense of self-awareness, self-control that Diane suggested, and look at opportunities for improvement that say that in my humility, this needs to not look like this. This can be something other than what I've done myself. And sometimes that means this. If Steve and Sarah decide that they want to be on a professional international volleyball team, and they were pretty darn good in high school and pretty darn good in college, but they want to be pros. Sometimes what you discover is when you go to the pros make you look, thank you, Jerry, you know what I'm saying here. The pros make you look like an infant. You were really good in your high school and you were pretty doggone good in your college, but when you get to the pros, there are people who make you look like you just started the game yesterday. So if you don't want to own that, and if you want to feel badly about it, and you want to blame other people for not preparing you, then what you're going to do is not look for opportunities for improvement. And eventually, you're going to either wash out, you're going to keep doing until somebody tells you you're the weak link, as opposed to what a lot of folks do in an interesting sense. Here's what Sarah might do. Don't want to pay for a coach. Pay for a trainer who's going to get you up to the level so that you don't have to feel like an athletic infant, so that you can then begin to contribute from a peer level. Because early on, when you were in your feelings, that's a today phrase, when you were in your feelings, you were able to practice self-control. You were able to practice self-awareness. You were able to practice humility and look for opportunities for improvement, and not think that just because you came from Podunk High School and Podunk College, now you're the next LeBron James of volleyball. You've got to be aware that if the opportunity, now I'm going to go a little church on this because I'm about to close, but I'm going to jump back to secular next week. If you want to be conformed to the likeness of Jesus, you ain't got the answer.
Correct.
There is a place where the answer is. And there's an entity who has the answer. And if you're not asking or inquiring for coaching or training, then guess what? You are pretty much mired in your own stuff, okay with it, with no sense of self-control, because you're not, in some ways, looking at it with a sense of humility and a sense of opportunity for improvement, because you think you've arrived, even if you don't say it. I'm done for this week. Your thoughts?
I'm reminded, as we compare fact to truth, of a scene in my all-time favorite movie. We've got Dr. Henry Jones Jr. teaching an archaeology class, and he says that the goal of what we're looking for is fact, not truth. And he says, you're looking for truth, so-and-so's philosophy class is right down the hall. So fact doesn't care about feeling, and truth is not subjective, to be honest. So fact is, I cannot walk off a 10-story building and expect to continue walking. Fact. No emotion. It's not gonna, gravity is not gonna have its feelings hurt because I have succumbed to it. Facts are facts.
I'm gonna close with a comment there when I think about Steve, especially when I hear Gene make the comment he made. And I'm really looking forward to getting further along on this because you're already beginning to illuminate some of the concepts here. I just hope you're ready. But I'll remind you in advance. The Bible has 66 books of factual component. And it's going to be interesting that if we really are honest and have a self-awareness and a sense of opportunities for improvement, a lot of our attitude about it is, so what? So what? So it says that. So what? I can't do that. It says that. That was for them. It says that. I want to do that. So please be ready, because you're exposing these facts that are a part of this book that Gene says we're supposed to in some ways be unemotional toward. By the way, we're not unemotional toward it. We regularly get our feelings hurt, and typically that's when we go running and screaming. So, thanks, folks. Let's pray, and then we'll be able to pray together and stuff as we close down. Thank you for the Sunday. Crazy as it sounds. Forward to congregately worshiping with you guys. We're actually trying to figure out some place we can do it here on another night to start. But love gathering with you guys and appreciate our opportunity to interact. I'm hoping that it really is like sharpening each other. Is that like Diane and Sarah in preparation for Bible studies? I try to do that during the course of the week, and I walk away hopefully with a lot more than what it is that potentially I expended, to the point where at some point in time today, I usually pass out. And because that's a lot of energy being expended, and I'm perfectly okay with that. Because the fact that the Lord has me in position to do this is much more than I could have deserved. So I'm very, very much appreciative. So let's pray, and then number next thing. Lord, wow. Like Nathan says, we don't deserve. What we deserve is not what we get. And to avoid using the overused term grace, the fact that we get to be your family, the fact that we get to not be enemies with our Creator, the fact that we can come into community with you each and every moment if we so choose. Wow, we didn't deserve what you gave us. And I appreciate Brother Steve this morning reminding us that in the Garden of Gethsemane, that Jesus had done the work. His it is finished on the cross meant then that all the physical states were completed as well. And so the fact that you struggled, the fact that you were punished for us suggests we do not need to live our lives like victims. We don't need to live our lives like the oppressed. We can live like we're the achievers. You achieved, and if indeed we are dead to ourselves, we've achieved through you. And so every opportunity that is heavenly and eternity oriented is ours because of our relationship towards you, if it's genuine and if it's authentic. Help us to live a sense day by day that that's to whom we belong. And in so doing, consider course correction. Consider that maybe 90, 95, 99% of the time we're veering off course, but that if you interlope into our lives, we can get to the destination that says, I'm confident of this very thing, that he who began a good work, he will complete it until the day of Jesus the Christ. Bless us mightily. Thank you for allowing us to join together virtually and in person. And bless us during the course of the week. Give us courage, allow us bravery and stories to be able to tell of our successes intermingling with the world of which we are in, but not a part. Amen.